Welcome everybody. Good evening. My name is Anju Gupta from Ivy Camp and Ivy Camp Ventures. Welcome to this edition of the Imagine webinar. For those of you who are new to our series, we created Imagine as a forum for discussion where we engage with business leaders, investors, entrepreneurs, academicians all across the globe to help us, imagine, new technologies, new opportunities in the future, be creative about how we approach some of these challenges in our fast changing world. Today, in our Imagine series, we are going to focus on a topic that is very deep to our hearts. The focus is deep tech. And we are going to be speaking with our speakers about what we have to look forward to from our startup ecosystem and the industry in this area. Before I introduce our esteemed panelists, a quick brief about IVCAP Ventures. This fund was founded in 2011 with a vision to leverage our global alumni ecosystems to foster entrepreneurship in India and identify and invest in high growth businesses with entrepreneurs with the potential to be market leaders. And then in 2015, we launched Ivy Camp, India's first innovation and entrepreneurship platform, where we created this as an engagement platform to leverage our alumni networks to work with, create value for, and help early stage entrepreneurs grow. And we have now created a network of domain experts, investors, incubators, corporates, and entrepreneurs whom we work with. And we regularly conduct engagements such as this and corporate innovation programs. A couple of points on logistics. Our discussion with our speakers will be for about 40 minutes, and then we'll engage in the QA with our audience. Any questions that you have, please submit through the chat on Zoom with your name, and we will raise them with the panelists. Deep tech is a very broad topic, and all of us have a very different perspective of what deep tech is. It could vary from health tech, from companies such as Moderna that took, for example, a vaccine from its conception phase to commercialization in a very short time frame, to a company such as SpaceX that's going out and exploring space. Successful deep tech ventures bring together multiple talents more so than any other area, including engineers, scientists, entrepreneurs to solve a problem. And today we will be looking at this from a broad spectrum, right from research and academics to the industry. And I'm very honored to introduce our panel, Professor Satya Chakravarty, R&D Professor of Aerospace Engineering from IIT Madras, and Ms. Nidhya Raj, Head of the Startup and VC Ecosystem from Southeast Asia from NVIDIA. Welcome to both of you. I'd like to start off with the same question to both of you. Maybe we start off with you, Professor Satya. If you could give maybe a 2-minute introduction about yourself and tell us what you consider to be deep tech. What does deep tech mean for you? So we'll start with you, Professor. Over to you.
Did you say me or?
Yes, to you, Professor.
Yeah. I think the introduction, what you gave is fairly appropriate. What we understand as deep tech is something that is difficult for a lot of people to replicate and requires patient development and probably has some good significant scientific underpinnings that has to be translated into technology, which in turn has to be put into a product, and that product should have a commercial value or a market. So the string of requirements from science to tech to product to market is what actually makes it a deep tech, as opposed to something that may not be so, which is essentially directly jump into developing a product to a market, right? So what is the depth that you're actually getting into is the tech, and the depth that further the tech gets is from the science. So if you have some science that is the foundation on which the tech is built, it gets even deeper, right? So that's the measure of the depth we can actually have for the deep tech. But as you said, it pans across a lot of different things like medicines or drug discovery, or let's say organ 3D printing, all kinds of things. Yeah, I mean, there is absolutely no boundaries for what exactly is deep. I mean, for example, people have been pushing out even blockchain and AI as deep tech, and definitely so if you have enough deep mathematical algorithms that they are developing in order to then codify them into products and stuff. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Satya. Nidya, same question to you. From an
Yeah.
industry perspective, what is deep tech to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So honestly speaking, I'm not a fan of the terminology called deep tech as such,
Okay.
because it's quite vague, to be frank, and it really confuses a lot of people about like, can this be deep tech? And a lot of I'm sure like all of you have come across events slash everything which does go into deep detail about what should be termed as like a deep tech and so on and so forth. I think to me, when I consider to be deep tech is something which is an amalgamation of any technology that requires a lot of time to develop as well as to create into a prototype. So it could be starting from an idea stage itself. They might be spending a lot of time and effort into it to develop into a product, just like Dr. Satya was mentioning, like, with respect to the time duration as such. And at the same time, it's also a factor of how much effort that people are putting into it. It could be mostly from an engineering standpoint, or it could be from a science standpoint. Even to prove a point or an observation, it is taking more than the usual, is why industry decided to term it as deep tech, I would say. And of course, it is evolving over the course of time. We had very familiar technologies such as AI and ML, which used to be a lot of difficulty was coming into the picture during the development. But nowadays, it become very well known in the industry that people are still contemplating, should we treat AI and ML to be deep tech in the first place, right? Or in terms of, I would say, anything which is like still requiring a lot of algorithmic interventions and everything can be like treated as deep tech in that sense, actually. But yeah, the definition goes on and on. Like we can literally write a book about like what should be like, and it keeps changing every now and then. So yeah.
Okay, thanks, Nidya. Switching now to the startup, ecosystem. So, Professor Satya, like, how have you seen kind of, startups in India, in deep tech? I'll continue using the same term for now. Change what, from, the research institute point of view has helped enable them. What do you see over the next few years, as, enabling startups, in this particular area?
I see a few drivers that are enabling this. Nothing to the extent specifically due to any academic interventions as such, at least on the side that I am, which is like typically aerospace, mechanical engineering based sciences, correct. But some of these things are essentially metal 3D printing, right? So that's something that is revolutionizing how you can develop complicated geometry without having to worry about how to assemble them, how to do precision machining of individual parts, and then doing precision assembly of those. All of that stuff actually is gotten rid of. You simply can just do a metal 3D printing. So that is one thing that is like a level playing field that is offered to someone in India to compete with like the big names around the world that have been there so far. Similarly, electrification itself, right? So the fact that we can actually make EVs, electric vehicles, itself is actually a leveler, because you can now suddenly think about startups trying to compete with the automobiles of the world in making two-wheelers and three-wheelers and four-wheelers and lots of such things. And similarly, the AI side of things, where a lot of IoT can be clubbed with deep learning or machine learning and so on to make these things smarter. And in the case of vehicles like self-driving cars, you can think about startups trying to take a shot at it just as well as the big names and so on. So some of these emerging technologies are offering a level playing field for deep tech startups to take a shot at developing appropriately sized products for specific markets that maybe big players will not bother about, right? And through that, they can actually probably grow from those markets into the big markets as well. Like a good example is electric planes that we do, where we start with the smaller planes to begin with, because that's what we can afford as a startup. And similarly, if you look at the micro gas turbines that we do, or the mini launch vehicles that we do, or the micro satellites that we do, or we have a hydrogen production which is based on a micro electrolyzer, but that's from a science point of view to keep the flow laminar without membranes. But ultimately, it also means we can do something that's affordable by a startup, right? And so on. So a lot of these things are micro, mini, nano, those things, but the basic technology building blocks are democratized. And the question is it possible for us to modularize this and then grow from here to become like significant competitors, or find markets large enough for us to be able to earn revenues that will make us big enough just doing these small products at volumes? So this is a game changer.
So just continuing on that, Professor Satya. So what are some of the stumbling blocks you see some of these entrepreneurs who are trying to get into this area? What are the stumbling blocks that remain, and that you see, changing this is really going to help us go to the next level to enable these kind of startups and entrepreneurs?
Right. So it depends on, I mean, this landscape is actually fast changing. So what is looking like a stumbling block today is also a pain point that there are people working to remove, right? So I shouldn't sound like complaining about it, but let me specify what they are, right? So for example, if you were a aircraft engine manufacturer, right, you would automatically be using certain commercial fluid mechanics or simulation software, or structural design software, which are all commercial software that today are existing at some very, very high prices,
okay,
for commercial licenses and so on. This is actually being democratized by a large number of players, but they need to get very robust software that can be used by designers of these smaller machines with 3D printing and so on. Now the question is, what do these softwares actually run on? And these have been interesting. When I grew up as a kid, we had these mainframe computers that chopped down into what they call CPU clusters. Now we are further down into GPU clusters, right? So that's the reason why I said I can't complain, because things are okay. But the question is, like, can we actually develop this software to run on GPU clusters? There are people working on it, but it's not mentioned, right? I see. When all of that stuff happens, within the next decade, I can actually see a lot of these people, this deep tech startups enabled, because we will now be going down to like simulation based design, which becomes like extremely robust when compared to handbook design or back of the envelope calculations based design with a lot of over designing and having like huge margins. All of that stuff is not acceptable in today's world. You have to actually do like an extremely very well fine-tuned design that's possible only with these simulations and on processors that can be afforded. Now, that area is like, and then we will soon also find out that machine learning can probably do these designs better than having to go back to your full Navier-Stokes equations and all of that stuff. So that can change these things completely.
I see.
Right. So we will have to see how that's going to pan out. I'm really excited for those days when we don't need to get educated for engineering to be able to do designs. Right.
Interesting.
I shudder to think that, but I think that.
Interesting. That's an interesting perspective. Yeah. So, Nidhya, you work, like with startups, kind of in the ecosystem. What are you seeing from an industry kind of perspective in terms of, what you want to see from the startup ecosystem? What are you seeing different? How do you think, the corporate sector can kind of enable this, take this further?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there are 2-3 things I've been seeing with a lot of like deep tech startups in the industry as such. One is everyone is too quick to assume that the product is going to work out in the market. Like that's been an inherent problem, especially when it comes to deep tech, actually, because the idea.
Why is it, if I could just interrupt you, why do you think it's more in deep tech versus others, or is it the same?
No, actually, it's more in deep tech because
Really? Okay.
the reason is also because you put in so much of energy and time in developing the product that it's hard to accept that this product is not going to work out. Like, and I
I
can
see.
feel that everybody can feel that because there is a lot of time and effort which has gone into the product development itself. So unlike
Okay.
an e-commerce company or like any other idea which is not necessarily like a lot of tech oriented, it's easy to drop that idea and move forward into something else, or pivot into
I
something
see.
completely different. So I think a lot of entrepreneurs tend to be more attached to the tech in that per
I
se,
see.
but at the same time, it's good and bad at the same time. So
Okay.
I think the faster you evolve, the better it is for the ecosystem. So that means you need to have more evolution capability when it comes to pivoting it out extremely fast, actually. So like and also it comes in when it comes to the technology side also, right? Every day you are seeing new and newer product getting launched in the market, which is either by the providers, like so at the end of the day, any deep tech company is not fully like done from the scratch, actually. So there is always a component which has been industry dependent, and if you don't evolve, you either get submerged into the larger ocean of too many technologies which is coming into the picture, or you get just stuck in this whole cycle of like product development itself, right? So I think the faster evolution is something I would really like to see, because or else it's gonna be a waste of time for them as well as the industry also, right? So at the end of the day, that's what matters. The secondary part is with respect to I guess, or I wish there is more transparency when it comes to the technical stack that people are using, actually, because a lot of startup in the name of and I know, like, because you want to keep your IP to yourself and to make sure that I'm doing better than everyone else, but it's actually not helping anybody. More you keep it to yourself, you're going to repeat the same mistakes that the second person next to you is actually doing in a co-working space, right? So I wish there is more transparency between the CTOs of all the companies. So one thing we have been trying to do even at NVIDIA is that, like, how do we bring in this dialogue between the CTOs or the developers as such to keep communicating between them, so that they can correct or like learn from the mistake of the person next to you. Like, it could be doing something entirely different, or they could be doing something exactly the same as you, and you can actually bring down the time which has been required to actually develop that product itself in the first place. And the third thing is with respect to I would say a lot of corporates, including us, like, we try to help startups in the name of accelerator programs and so on and so forth. But honestly speaking, I think there is more to be done, like, because it's usually comes from this angle of we provide a set of technical tools and support and engineering support, market access and everything. But there is still a disconnect in actually implementing it from the point of, like, that particular startup reaching it to the end goal, right? So typically the programs are cohort driven, or even if it is the ones which are not cohort driven, like the ones which is at NVIDIA, we also want to improvise on that part. Like, I think it's as an ecosystem, we are trying to figure out, like, what is the better ways to connect to startups and make it more meaningful for them, because time is money for everyone, right?
Absolutely.
So I think all of us has to be more responsible in understanding everybody's time matters, be it a startup or a corporate. So I think that equal platform is yet to be achieved. So that's something I think we can do more. So this is from a, like, I don't want to be biased in that opinion either, but at the same time, I feel like that's where we could improve a lot as everybody put together. So yeah, so these are some of the things I wish
I wanted to echo on all the 3 points.
Please.
Nidhya said. Fantastic points, first of all, right? So the first point is, I think as a tech professor, right, I am the one who actually, if you see a lot of interviews that I give and people ask, like, which wins at the end of the day, tech or business, the answer is very simple. It's business. Tech is only an enabler. The business is really counts. So one of the things we have to make sure is that the entrepreneurs are not wedded to the tech. They look at the tech as an enabler for achieving a certain problem that you want to solve for customers and earn revenues. That's what the business is all about, right? So let's actually be very, very clear about that. That's something that cannot be overstated, right? So now that said, pivoting is actually not so easy in deep tech because it may be specifically based on a certain hypothesis, and it takes a long time for you to actually realize that hypothesis. And halfway through, let's say the scenario changed completely, right? Somebody else came up with some other, they cracked the code on something else, which was an assumption that you made in your hypothesis, right? Your entire thing falls flat, and you're now starting to look at what else can I apply this for, and maybe you may find or you may not find. So pivoting may not be so easy. So I think it's important to take a shot at it with that assumption. Always watch out for what are the assumptions you're making, where it's going to fall flat. All of those things are actually very, very important for the entrepreneur. Otherwise, you just get married to something, and you may not know what you're going at. That said, because the hypothesis has to be tested over time, I think entrepreneurs do not want to share and bear everything that they have, right? So that it's going to take a while for them to test their hypothesis anyway. So, investors actually try to get ways around by having like third-party validation of the hypothesis and all of those things, independent verification. Do whatever you can, but you will know whether the hypothesis is validated only when we get to the market, right? So finally, it's a market validation that matters rather than even the tech validation. Okay, so that's something that we have to obviously keep in mind. And the last point is something that I want to actually jump in and say, please come to the NCCRD at IIT Madras, where we have like 8+ deep tech startups which live here for 4 years. Right? And that is the true accelerator you can think of, right? We don't do like 9 months, nothing. We don't have a program. We just, if you find a good tech, say, hey, come and live here and do whatever you want. Right?
I think that's wonderful, actually, because that's actually true, because I guess it's also coming from the angle of everyone is trying to learn from everyone. It's just that maybe the more dialogues like Professor Satya was mentioning, right? Maybe that's what the better aim is, rather than just assuming that things will work out. Maybe keeping that researcher at heart and then working on is a really good idea.
Early on, we were actually sensitized to the lean startup model, where customer orientation is important, right? Customer validation, customer acquisition, customer discovery. Those things are super important, right? You have to understand what a customer needs. Otherwise, don't even talk about the tech.
Absolutely. Yeah, to your point, is it business or is it tech? I mean, ultimately, it's a solution that you're selling, right? If people don't find enough value to pay for it, it kind of defeats the purpose. So, Nadia, you mentioned one interesting thing, like a challenge in terms of sharing information, but at the same time not wanting to kind of give away too much. IP is always an issue that comes up, and I'm sure it's a similar issue in India and outside. So I'm curious.
I have a different opinion, actually. If you really look at the open source movement, which really triggered in the early years, right? So that has been a fantastic way to kind of democratize the access to technology, as well as how people used to think about tech as a product and enabler, rather than just something which is like you can use to make money for. So these are two different things. So people often get confused that like, if you share information, you lose money, and hence like the value of product goes down. That's not the case in most of the situation, unless it is like core tied to your IP is actually your core valuation, right? So a lot of time, I'm sure that's the same case with most of the programs which has been run by universities, as well as so if you look at, so even within NVIDIA, we do work with more than 1,000+ universities across the globe. These are the Stanfords and the MITs of the world, like where we try to work with them very closely to a level that because the innovation at the core of it is usually started at a school or a college level actually. And as a company which has taken a lot from this ecosystem to understand the trends and everything, I think we do give it back to the society by working with them more and more, and at the same time, like giving access to the information, not just monopolizing it, right? So that's something which is most corporates don't do. So I think everybody at the end of the day is trying to make this system better, and keeping it as a two different segments rather than combining it, right? So the more of such people are there, the easier it is for the ecosystem, actually. And I also feel like there is a I would say different learning curve when it comes to the hardware ecosystem as opposed to the software ecosystem. So that makes it a little more difficult, to be honest. And I'm sure, like, most people who are in the audience also who is playing around with the hardware piece knows the difficulty in that part as well, because unless you actually get to the business and like it is very difficult to actually imagine to be in that shoes at the same time, right? So I think that's the caveat in that whole equation. Like, how do you make it more accessibility is one part. The secondary part is with respect to if I'm learning something out of it, how do I even share that information? Like, it's difficult to even comprehend at that level, like, because I'm experiencing it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that, like, it is something that I would be okay to share with in the first place. So those kind of questions keep coming in between the entrepreneurs, and especially when I say entrepreneurs, I also treat the people who are working on the ground as entrepreneurs, because they, at the end of the day-to-day work on a product and keep learning. And as much as we underestimate that crowd, I think a lot of learning need to be shared, and then it should be quite flat when it comes to sharing the information, as well as to keep it more, I would say more clearer to the organization as well as the rest of the world, right? So, and at the same time, the value of the product, at the end of the day, you can monetize it in various ways. So it purely depends on the organization and the product that they are working on. Like, where do you want to draw that line? So this is in no way saying that, like, you shouldn't make money out of the product that you're working on. That's not what it is. There is always a different way to look at things, and still making it better for the rest of the world too, right? Because in any given point in time, that's how we learn, and that's how exactly the world actually worked, and it has been evolving. So yeah,
absolutely.
Just one point there is, commoditization actually comes from commoditization of any technology. And if you're looking at a deep tech hardware startup, they are just developing the technology. It's going to take a while for them to develop it first and then make it a commodity. And once it becomes a commodity is when it actually gets thrown up for everybody else to adopt. And at that point, you could then say, well, if you're an Elon Musk, you would say, I can keep my patents bare and so on. But it will take a little while for everybody to actually get to that point. But which is much easier in software, right? I think that's a point that Nidhya is making, which is, I think it's about commodification, and right. If you can get to that level, then democratization happens.
Interesting. One of the things we hear from both investors and entrepreneurs in this space is that it's always hard, and more than any other spaces, it's hard for them to find domain experts with experience, with knowledge in this. I wanted to get both your perspectives. Is that true? Is that changing? How do we access? How can these guys access more domain experts in the deep tech space? Open to both of you.
Nidhya first.
I would say there is a lot of experts that we have not utilized yet. We could start from the universities itself, actually. So a lot of universities have been putting in a lot of effort into like developing products and technologies that we have not been capitalizing the right way. That's one part. And the secondary part is also from the maker culture that we have. I mean, it's not like, I wouldn't say India specific, but there is a lot of communities which is like working on various technologies and products, and which are quite accessible to give access to those information and all those things. We should start capitalizing on those communities which are more towards making sure that people are learning about various technologies. That's something. The tertiary part is like as much as corporate experts, or I even say when it comes to a VC firm and other things, they try to keep like an internal team which is capitalizing on the technical expertise and so on and so forth, which they typically give access to when there is a interest which has been happening from the industry, right? So that's the same case with the corporate also. So it's more about I personally feel like irrespective of the organization that any particular person is working in, if they can be more accessible during the time that they are not necessarily associated with that particular organization, maybe that might give more access for experts in general. And I guess there is also some other platforms I've been seeing, like, to give more access to subject matter expertise, like either when it comes to, I would say, including Ivy Camp, like you guys also do or create boot camps and everything, where you try to say that, okay, these are some of the experts that we have onboarded for this particular program. So I'm sure, like, all these events at some point in time gives the industry some access to these experts. And the secondary part comes in from none of these as persons. A lot of research which has been coming into the industry. There is information out there. Like, it's not like information is not available. It's more about how do you utilize it in the right way. So I guess the curation is still difficult for a lot of, because at the end of the day, I don't have time and effort to lose, like, because as a deep tech company, I might not be well funded enough to keep having that leisure time to research a lot, because I have a timeline that I should keep into mind to develop this product and get into market, like, so it becomes a coefficient of those, actually. So I guess again, coming back to the point of, like, I wish industry can be more transparent when it comes to some of these aspects that makes it more easier for the entrepreneurs in general, actually. So I do see a lot of interesting, like, I would say a good intention which has been happening with respect to a lot of developer groups in India, just like what's happening across the globe. So I guess more of these developer forums and communities is gonna really drive that change at the root level, like, and there is also, like, we need to also do the top to bottom, like bottom ups has already been covered by a lot of these communities. So the CXO level interaction is, it's been quite, I wouldn't say not productive. It is happening, but it's not necessarily meeting a joining point. Like, there is still a gap. So I think it would take little more time, maybe, especially in India, like, at least in some of the countries, especially like Israel and like Germany, and I would say even Singapore, I've seen a lot of changes which has been happening, maybe due to the pandemic and everything which has been going on. So I have seen more accumulation of resources which has been happening. So for India to happen that, maybe we need to keep conducting more and more, I would say, discussions and maybe even policy level intervention to make it more accessible for everybody. So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I have a couple of different complementary points, as well as something that I can supplement what Nidhya said. Coming from where I am, which is primarily in the aerospace domain, and I want to basically think of aerospace as something of a high-tech version of, let's say, mechanical engineering, which means that we could bring down this high-techness of aerospace down to a lot of mechanical engineering-based products, let us say, or electromagnetic, whatever you want to call them, right? Something that is empowering mobility and the hard, larger machines that we are into. So I think in that there are essentially two things that are happening in India. One, and both of them are equally important. One is, first of all, India is actually a very peculiar country, that even just soon after independence, with like supposedly a lot of people starving and being a very poor country and all that stuff, we had like lots of aerospace institutions that got started, right? So and so that culture of actually doing something niche has been around, that is more government modulated. So it's been sort of on a low key, not really scaling up a lot, but there is this intense development of expertise that's happened in the country for about 40-50 years, right? And that was actually made use of by a lot of these multinationals, starting from GE or Pratt & Whitney or Rolls-Royce or Snecma or Siemens or Airbus or Boeing. All of them actually have R&D institutions in Bangalore particularly, and a few other parts of the country. They have been actually hiring literally thousands of engineers that are Indian origin people. So the amount of workforce that we have on aerospace design, for example, is actually the largest in the world. And that's sort of like a best kept secret, right? We don't do all the, we don't have planes and engines made out of India yet, but we still have people designing them, right? So that's actually a market to tap. So the talent exists, one, right? So how to do things at a high quality level that is, world standards thing that actually that talent exists in the country in the first place, right?
Okay.
Now come to the other side. A lot of things that we are doing are in a new way of doing, like 3D printing and so on, that nobody else has done before. Okay, so we don't have Elon Musk 3D printing his rockets, right? Or neither is NASA, nor does ISRO, none of them, right? But we do. Okay, so where do we get that expertise, right? Please, we don't need expertise because it's actually so new. Fresh out of college students actually do much better than anybody else. Okay, just trust them to use their imagination, right? Forget about their grades, forget about their pedigree. Just let them, have a free hand. And on top of it, you also have a lot of YouTube information today. So the internet is actually a great teacher, right? So people can pick up threads, use their imagination, connect the dots, create things. Now, obviously, that's a risky way of doing it, but that's exactly where a startup trying to make a smaller rocket or a smaller plane is a better risk to, take a shot at for new ways of doing things by fresh out of college students learning from YouTube, along with these MNC trained and government organization trained people. That combination of things is something that has never happened before anywhere in the world yet. We are trying to actually exploit that, and that's where we are going forward with, right? So this is something that's very new that we are trying to do.
Interesting, very, very interesting. So just a couple of questions that kind of are coming through. So for an early stage kind of entrepreneur who is kind of looking at a deep tech solution, how should they think about, any advice of how they should think about, commercializing, testing, just starting to think about how to commercialize their product?
I'm going to jump on this. I'm going to jump on this.
Okay.
Right? And not. I mean, I'm pretty sure Lydia has lots to say about it, but I'm going to. Right. So the reason why I'm going to jump on this is because of what I actually said before, in supplementing what she said, which is the only thing that matters for anybody is problem solving. Right. You have to worry about what is a problem that you're trying to solve for which customer and what's your market for it. All of those things are very important for you to keep in mind. It's not the tech that you bring to the table at all. Nobody cares, right? There is no point in actually having a tech if it is not solving a problem for somebody, right? So just because you have some tech doesn't mean that you can start. Sorry, doesn't work that way, right? You have to start from the customer backwards, right? Identify what problem your tech is going to solve for who and what is that market size. If it is actually something that is commensurate with the investment that is required for you to develop this product with the tech that you have a business case. Otherwise, go home and sleep.
Yeah, interesting. Nidya, anything to add?
I think no, I completely concur on that part actually, because as much as like R&D specific that NVIDIA is, so is IIT Madras, and like all of us at any given point in time, we treat technology as a tool and not the end goal or anything. But at the same time, RC also says like, if the tech is good, everything else will fall into the place. So it's like a factor you cannot avoid. Like you have to have a best of best technology, because that's how you bring in better valuation. And also any deep tech, if you think of it, it's just to make the life easier for the humans, right? So, or I would say it is making it more easier and efficient for any kind of processes in general. So bringing down that time means that you need to have better infrastructure, better technology stack, better team in place also to market that product. Like, so everything comes into the picture. So anybody who is starting out, I would strongly recommend them to have like a proper understanding about what they want to actually solve, and at the same time have a good technical person on board it, because a lot of people end up making a lot of mistakes, and this iteration itself is expensive. Like and I'm not talking just from the money. Time is also money according to me. So it's both are, you need to have a strong team in place, like, because that really plays a major important role, and you can avoid a lot of mistakes. And I would say stay connected to the communities as much as possible. Don't be under this assumption that, like, if this is and also I think Professor was also mentioning about this whole assumption that we keep in mind, and then we try to validate it by multiple observe various changes which has been happening, and the whole analysis comes into waste if it is not working out, right? So those things also matter a lot. So keeping that inquisitive nature, and at the same time being more careful when it comes to, like, I would say making more informed decision rather than, like, taking a wing at it is always going to be helpful at any given point in time. And that the same thing will also apply when you raise money also, right? Because a lot of investors get skeptical because they are not sure about, like, a lot of stuffs. And if you want to bring down that apprehension with the investors, the best idea is you can be more if you can explain it better and make it more easier for them to understand, then at least that part becomes easier. And it's not like at the end of the day, I don't feel that there is shortage of fund, because there has been a lot of change which has been happening in last 5 years. There is a lot of VC firms which has been just focusing on deep tech investment, doing amazing job, actually taking a shot at smaller startups, idea stage to product level to scaled up versions and everything. So even within NVIDIA program, we do have, like, larger AI deep tech startups and everything which is coming into the program. To the smaller ones, we want to support everybody because everyone's journey is different. So that's what I think. There are people to support you, like corporates, VC firms, to industry forums, to organization like IVCAM, to everybody is out there. So it's just about taking the right help. And also I would say staying closer to the research ecosystem really values here, especially in deep tech. So which is one reason I always like to go back to the universities and understand what's going on there too. Because although that might not be mainstream yet, I think there's a lot to learn from. So
I absolutely agree with kind of both of you. And even like you brought up the point of investment, I think over the last 4-5 years, like you said, investment in kind of deep tech, and you have to suggest a better term for that.
I think we should stick to that word till the, I mean, it will keep evolving. So today it's deep tech, tomorrow it's something else, like, so that name keeps changing, but I think it's more about technology at the end of the day. So I think that way it's still okay.
Like you said, investments have kind of really grown over the last 4 to 5 years. And like you said, a lot of funds now are looking at kind of deep tech. They are getting people, in-house who can help them understand. But I want to just kind of re-emphasize what you said. When an investor looks at a startup which has a tech solution, it's really important to have a technology person kind of on board, because I think that is very core. Having somebody kind of explain to them and also give confidence that they understand the technology that you're working in, what works, what doesn't work. That's a very kind of key thing that any investor will kind of look at. Obviously, Professor Satya, what IIT Madras is doing with its corporate tech park is very innovative, very new. What would you suggest, other universities can do to kind of improve kind of research in this area, encourage students working in this area? What are other models they can look at adopting? What other support universities should look at to provide, similar to what you've been doing, or in addition to what you've been doing at IIT Madras?
I don't know. I mean, I don't see why they can't do what I'm doing in the first place. But it's possible that academics all over the world are like small businessmen. I mean, let's put it very bluntly, right? For all the scholarliness that we display, we are fundamentally just doing small business, right? And there is like a lot of smallness about it, like including like the space of the lab that we have, and so on. We fight over all these things across with people. And so one of the things is, like, if you have to make even a small rocket, you need some space. You need to, if you want to make like a small plane, you need some space, right? So, and that is not so easy. And then people say, hey, can we do all these things in academia or not? And so on. So there are like lots of literally physical boundaries that we build around ourselves, saying that this is not possible and we want to use only our brains and not really do it with our hands. Maybe that's cultural in India, but actually it's cultural everywhere, right? So people don't want to, they want to spend their brains and use it to show something on a computer, but a computer cannot fly you. You need to make a plane, or you cannot take you to space, right? You need to have a rocket. So for that, you need to be able to afford some space, which I seem to have spent effort building a 5-story building with a National Center for Combustion R&D with a lot of laser gizmos and all those things to do spray diagnostics, whatever, right? So maybe last 30 seconds was a show off. That was not the intent. But my point is, like, if people can spend that effort, this was serendipitous. I tried to do this for research, but I found that enabling startups is actually much more gratifying and could be paying much better in the long run. So this is the model that I think I'm starting for anywhere around the world as far as academia goes. And then I'm happy to share my experience with anybody who wants to emulate this.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that a lot of research-based entrepreneurs are coming up. It's really fabulous to see. The good thing about the research ecosystem is it's also very small. It's not too large either. So, and all of the researchers end up collaborating also. So that's great, actually, irrespective of the university that they are belonging to, and which makes it more accessible for the technology that they have, right? So I think I wish it was more better in India is like the flexibility when it comes to what a particular researcher or a student, be it the guide or the student should be working on and everything. There is still a lot of reserved methodologies, I would say. So if the departments itself has end up collaborating, there could be more and more innovation happening. So I think it's just the rules and regulation which is coming into the picture, because it's also how an organization is made. So if those kind of politics doesn't come involved, maybe that can actually enhance a lot. But having said that, I think the researchers at any given point in time finds a way to come back and figure out like how to get out of the situation, and then find talent, or like it could be like in terms of infrastructure or even funds and everything. So there has been a lot of change which has been happening. And maybe one of the good thing is, like, especially the universities which is funded by central government and state government both, there is still enough fund for them to kind of pivot around and experiment and so on and so forth. So there need to be more, I would say, funds allocated to, in general, research segment, like, in India, right? Because that drives a lot of innovation. So that also could ideally help all of us.
So what role, Nidhya, do you see the corporate sector kind of playing in enabling all this? Obviously, NVIDIA has an accelerator. Are there, like, two parts of this question? Are there particular sectors you see getting more kind of involved in this? If so, which would they be? And what do you want to see more of from the industry to enable this?
Right. So even if it's NVIDIA or any other corporate, you look at it, most of all these corporate organizations do have one department or one particular initiative which is looking at the higher education and research, I would say. So this higher education and research segment is quite core to most of the organization for three reasons. One is, obviously, you get to see what's happening on the ground level when it comes to research, and that access gives a lot of privilege for this corporate to also work on something which is extremely niche. The secondary part is also in acquiring talent which is working on the ground, because a lot of organizations tend to hire best of the best researchers, or even the entrepreneurs which is working on the ground. They tend to have more visibility and so on and so forth. The tertiary part is with respect to while enabling this open innovation, I guess more and more corporates are realizing the value in core research which has been happening, which might or might not be able to be funded by a particular organization, right? So not all the corporates does have that agenda in place that you can easily recognize by the number of white papers that an organization releases, right? Very few do actively participate in that. Even when it comes to India also, like if you look at the recent conferences of ISCVPR or RSNA or any of this, the number of papers which has been accepted from India as a country is quite low when it comes to other countries. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that we don't innovate. We do have a lot of innovation which has been happening on the ground. So the visibility part still need to be sorted out, because those recognition do kind of put you in the radar with the rest of the world, right? And it does also help us in getting more access to funding as well as corporate attention, because most corporates doesn't have like the headquarters in India, right? And there is one segment of I would say the development centers are based out of India, not necessarily the decision-making center. So that does actually becomes a hurdle in a lot of funding research, I would say. So if we could bridge that gap, maybe we can work better actually in that particular say. But at the same time, all of us, like, corporates are trying to do their best. And it's not just in terms of academic institution, but also the government research institution. So that particular segment is not really out in the public, like, because there's a lot of DRDOs.
Yeah, correct.
All those organizations which is doing fabulous work at some point, like, in one area or the other, that is not in the public eye because of various reasons. But at the same time, there is underlying, there is a lot of collaboration which is happening between all the corporations and research institutions as well as academic institutions. So more and more that keeps happening. I think it can get better also, like, at the same time. So yeah. And
so go ahead, sorry.
No, I think for NVIDIA, so we do have like a virtual accelerator program. So the reason why we kept it virtual is also because we didn't want to restrict into one geo asset. So and because of that, we could actually support a lot of startups, like, so it's right now there's 9,000 plus startups across the globe, which we are supporting. And this is at various stages. So even from an product stage to somebody who is IPO ready is also like are part of the program, and which is what makes it more easier, because the support can be endless, like, and it can be customized to each and every startup as well as the developers which are part of the program. So and I'm like, you can see that like most of the corporates also have a lot of open innovation program which is up and running, which is fabulous actually, because more and more programs keeps happening. I, however, limited the number of startups getting funded or like, I would say supported by these startups. There is still something happening. So something is better than nothing is always working. But at the same time, we could all do more any given point in time. So, but I would say ask more. Because sometimes startups are also not clear on what they want. So that makes it a little trickier, the relationship. So the more clearer you are and vocal about it, that easier it is for that relationship to work out, like when it comes, especially when it comes to corporate. So the more you push for it, it's easier to get that done, because you can easily show that push and pull factors there, right? So I think I would say ask more is always the way to do. And nobody should be shameless about that. So, and especially like because if I was in that position, I would be shameless and asking about this is what exactly I want, like, because it's making it easier for everybody actually. So
absolutely, very, very true. I totally agree with that sentiment. One more question to both of you. Over the next few years, where do you see, I mean, given where we are today, what areas do you see innovation happening in India? Like, where do you see it going over the next few years, both from a perspective of where funds are available, where you see expertise, where you see interest, where you see the need specific to India? Nidhya, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I think from an industry segment perspective, FSI and healthcare has been quite under the radar for a lot of investors because of the returns which has been happening in the industry. And this is also from the angle of, I would say, consumer internet companies, because it need not be a consumer internet company, but the deep tech startup might be actually solving a problem that consumer internet company is actually doing. Like, it could be as simple as a routing algorithm, or it could be as simple as making it easier for the logistic transportation to have optimized routes, or like, I would say even from an inventory management, or even video analytics on top of it. So these smaller segments which has been coming in and become more and more prevalent, there is a lot of funds which has been going inside in those segments. And interestingly, a lot of newer companies are getting funded, especially in robotics. And I was also very surprised to see that. And
why surprised?
Because I think there was still a lack of standardization of like the tech assets. So which is why a lot of startup might not be like, when I really take a lot of startups at large, and then there is still a filtration which is happening, and somehow I felt like Indian startups are missing out on that, but we are back to its glory, which is great. I think this financial year has been quite good for the robotics companies, or I would say anybody who is working on automating workloads and so on. I'm talking about edge device based companies actually, and that's quite interesting. Then the secondary part is healthcare has always been the best. I think the amount of money which has gone into that market is quite huge, and there is more and more investors which is trying to back India because of the kind of problems that we are solving, and it also adds a lot of diversity when it comes to the data set that we are bringing into the table, right? So that is one of the major element, I would say. Like if you look at like Cure.ai or a Sictuple or like any of these companies, there is a lot of diversity that Indian startups are bringing onto the table, so which is making it more and more valuable, I would say, the startups. So and there is a lot of movement which has been happening in getting funding actually. Then apart from the segments, I want to actually also talk about the accumulation part which has been happening also, like, because a lot of deep tech startups was about literally differentiating between smaller, like I think Professor was also mentioning about the mini problems, like, or I would say making it more micro level. And it's like, just like the API era we have the same movement which has been happening in deep tech, but at some point this is going to converge, like, because if you look at even the recent BCG report was also saying that a lot of companies, when you look at from a deep tech angle, they don't just work on one core tech. It's more than one or two technology combined, right? So there is convergence which has been happening, which is great. So at some point we might have a better convergence, and like that means accumulation of technology as well as product put together, right? Not at the super app level, but at the same time making it more easier for the companies to utilize any service. So that's also an angle of making data, irrespective of the data type that they deal with. It could be video, audio, or textual data, or whatever the data be. I still can make a better analytics report, or like a better decision-making thing. So all those things are coming into picture. So maybe that's one of the trends 10 years down the line, for sure. Like, these I would say accumulated technologies is going to come up, which is going to be quite huge actually. Just like we have seen the same thing in the software SDKs and other stuff. So same thing is going to happen here also. That's what I personally feel.
Okay, thanks. Your perspective, Dr. Satya?
Yeah, so I think in the domain that I am in, I think I can clearly see a lot of upsurge in anything to do with mobility and energy, and the combination of those two. Like what I think Dia said, most of startups are all about innovation, which is essentially putting like two different things together instead of inventing anything new. So that's what innovation is when compared to invention, right? So that means that we will have convergence of sustainable energy and sustainable mobility together, right? So and so that means like energy storage, energy production, or consumption. All of these things in sustainable manner is sustainable. Actually means both. It's not just ecology but also economy. I mean, can we afford to make technology that is that can make business sense while it is also being green, right? So I think that is going to be one area which is going to bloom in the next decade. That will include battery technologies, all kinds of things, right? And fast charging, supercharging, or supercapacitors, ultra capacitors, all of that stuff, will get in there. The other thing that's interesting is anything to do with imaging. So the cameras are becoming so miniaturized, and also becoming like megapixel accuracies, resolutions, and so you will now have like lots of deep learning algorithms that are picking up facial recognition or feature recognition, all of these things, right? So that's going to just become like endemic. Wherever you step out, you are actually imaged, and right, anything is imaged and sorted out, or whatever it is, right? So they will start looking at everything and then trying to make sense out of it with machines, right? So that's something that's going to become like big. The third thing that we want to really be interested in is neurotech, right? So yeah, I would like to stick my neck out and say, because if you're looking at like a period of about a decade, I think we will get into bionics, which is like implants and all of that stuff. But just taking signals out of the brain and getting thoughts to process and command machines, these things will actually become, big, is what I think. Yeah. You're muted, Danju.
Thank you. We're at time. I mean, this has been a great discussion. I'm sure we still have a couple of questions, but I'll share those out and get back later. But thank you so much, Professor Satya, Nidhya, for your time. And I mean, for me, it's been like great learning and, really interesting to hear your perspectives. I think this is a space where we're going to see a lot of stuff happening. So I'm also excited, from an investor perspective to see what's happening, what's going, to see the collaboration. I think it's a great area for collaboration, like both of you have mentioned, in research between the industry and academia. So I think the next few years are going to be really interesting for India, and it'll be nice to see how we move forward. Thank you both for taking the time to do this, and anybody whose questions we didn't get through, we'll definitely share them and get back to you. Thank you to all the attendees for being here. Hope this was interesting for you as well. Have a great evening, everybody. Thanks so much.
Thank you.